The cafe grew strangely quiet the moment she stepped through the door. Every eye seemed to drift toward the young woman standing in the entrance, her hair slightly messy from rushing across town, her face flushed with exhaustion, and a small child sleeping peacefully against her shoulder. She looked around the crowded room with nervous eyes before whispering to herself, "Sorry, I'm late." Across the room, the man waiting for his blind date slowly stood from his chair, completely stunned. This wasn't what he had imagined. The carefully planned evening, the expectations, the awkward excitement of meeting someone new, everything changed in a single heartbeat. Yet neither of them realized that this unexpected meeting would become the beginning of a story neither could have planned, a story about compassion, courage, and the extraordinary power of choosing kindness when life refuses to follow the script. Before we continue, if you believe kindness deserves a second chance and that every person has a story worth hearing, please like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone you care about, and subscribe to Kindness Matters. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that remind the world compassion still exists. Morning sunlight poured through the cafe windows, filling every corner with warmth, but it could not erase the nervousness sitting inside Rowan Mercer. At 34, he had finally agreed to let his older sister arrange a blind date after years of avoiding relationships. His previous engagement had ended painfully when someone walked away simply because life became complicated. Since then, Rowan had buried himself in work as an architect, convincing himself that blueprints were easier to understand than people. He had arrived 20 minutes early, ordered coffee, and rehearsed polite conversation in his mind, expecting to meet someone cheerful, confident, and carefree. Instead, the woman who had just entered looked as though life had asked far too much of her. Her name was Mireya Collins. She was 29 years old, and exhaustion had become a permanent companion. The little boy asleep in her arms was not her son. He was her 5-year-old nephew, Finn, whose mother, Mireya's younger sister, had been rushed to the hospital before sunrise after unexpected complications from a serious illness. The babysitter cancelled without warning, neighbors were already at work, and there was simply no one else she could trust. She had almost cancelled the blind date, but after months of encouragement from her friends, she decided she owed herself one small chance to remember she was still more than someone constantly solving other people's emergencies. The morning had fought her every step. Traffic crawled because of road construction. Finn had cried after waking from a nightmare. His favorite blanket had been left behind at the hospital. Mireya had spent nearly an hour calming him before he finally fell asleep against her shoulder during the taxi ride. By the time she reached the cafe, she knew the man waiting for her had every reason to leave. She expected disappointment. She expected judgment. She expected another reminder that complicated people were rarely anyone's first choice. Instead, Rowan quietly pulled out a chair, asked the server to bring a glass of water, and gently moved his coffee cup farther away so there would be room for the sleeping child. He noticed the dark circles beneath Mireya's eyes, the worn strap on her handbag, the hospital visitor bracelet still around her wrist, and realized there was a much bigger story standing in front of him than he had imagined. As the minutes passed, the conversation began slowly. Mireya apologized repeatedly for arriving late, for bringing Finn, for looking tired, and for ruining what should have been a normal first date. Rowan surprised even himself by telling her she hadn't ruined anything. "Life," he said, "rarely asks permission before changing our plans." Those simple words eased some of the tension resting on her shoulders. The cafe buzzed with ordinary conversations while something extraordinary quietly unfolded between two strangers. They did not spend time discussing favorite movies or dream vacations. Instead, they spoke about responsibility, family, disappointment, hope, and the strange ways people discover strength they never knew they possessed. Rowan admitted that losing his engagement had made him afraid of trusting anyone again. Mireya confessed that caring for her family had left almost no room to care for herself. Hours seemed to disappear unnoticed. Finn eventually woke, rubbed his sleepy eyes, and shyly smiled when Rowan offered him a blueberry muffin. The little boy laughed for the first time that day after Rowan folded a paper napkin into a tiny bird. That simple moment filled the table with unexpected warmth. Mireia watched quietly, realizing she had not laughed like this in months. Just before noon, Mireia's phone rang. Her face immediately turned pale. Her sister's condition had worsened unexpectedly, and doctors needed a family member at the hospital right away. Without hesitation, she gathered Finn, apologized once more, and prepared to leave. She assumed the date had officially ended before it had truly begun. But Rowan surprised her again. Instead of saying goodbye, he asked if she had driven herself. When she explained she had come by taxi, he simply picked up the cafe bill, walked beside her, and offered to drive them safely to the hospital. It wasn't a romantic gesture. It wasn't an attempt to impress her. It was simply the kindest thing he could think to do. The hospital corridors were bright yet strangely heavy with uncertainty. Rowan sat quietly in the waiting room while Mireia spoke with doctors. He entertained Finn with coloring books from the children's corner, built towers from paper cups, and patiently answered dozens of curious questions only a child could ask. Nurses passing by smiled at the unlikely pair. Several hours later, Mireia returned with tears streaming down her face, not tears of grief, but of overwhelming relief. Her sister had stabilized. Recovery would still take time, but the immediate danger had passed. For the first time all day, Mireia allowed herself to breathe deeply. She looked toward the waiting area and saw Rowan asleep in an uncomfortable plastic chair while Finn rested peacefully beside him. The sight stopped her in her tracks. No one had asked him to stay. He had no obligation to remain. Yet there he was, quietly keeping company with people he had only met that morning. Over the following weeks, what began as an interrupted blind date slowly transformed into genuine friendship. Rowan visited the hospital with children's books for Finn. He helped Mireia organize transportation, grocery shopping, and paperwork whenever she became overwhelmed. He never acted like a hero. He simply noticed what needed doing and did it without expecting praise. Little by little, Mireia began believing that dependable people still existed. Rowan, in turn, discovered that love was not built through perfect first impressions or flawless circumstances. It grew through ordinary moments, sharing hospital coffee, celebrating small improvements, comforting each other after difficult days, and choosing patience instead of convenience. Months later, when Mireia's sister had fully recovered and Finn returned home, Rowan invited Mireia back to the very same cafe where everything had begun. This time, she arrived early. Sunlight streamed through the windows just as it had before, but everything felt different. There was no rushing, no fear, no exhaustion weighing her down. She smiled as she remembered the words she had spoken during their first meeting, "Sorry, I'm late." Looking back, both of them realized those words had never really mattered. What mattered was that someone had chosen understanding over assumptions. A single act of compassion had rewritten two lonely lives. Their story quietly spread among friends and family, not because it was dramatic, but because it reminded everyone that the greatest relationships often begin in the most imperfect moments. The world constantly tells people they must appear successful, confident, and flawless to deserve love. Rowan and Mireia proved something far more beautiful. Sometimes the strongest connections begin when someone sees you at your most exhausted, your most vulnerable, and your most human, and decides to stay anyway. If this story has touched your heart so far, please take a moment to like this video, leave a heartfelt comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to Kindness Matters. Your support helps these stories reach people who may be waiting for a reminder that kindness can still change lives. Special request: before this story ends, tell us in the comments, have you ever experienced unexpected kindness from a stranger that changed your life? We'd love to read your story. Exactly 1 year after that unforgettable morning, Rowan and Mireia returned to the cafe once again. This time, there was laughter instead of worry, peace instead of uncertainty, and hope instead of fear. Finn raced ahead carrying 3 paper birds Rowan had folded just for him, carefully placing one on each coffee cup. The waitress recognized them immediately and smiled without knowing the full story. Neither Rowan nor Mireia spoke much about the difficult beginning anymore because they had learned something far greater than either of them expected. Life will almost never unfold according to perfect plans. Meetings will be interrupted. Hearts will carry invisible burdens. Dreams will arrive disguised as inconveniences. But when someone chooses compassion instead of judgment, patience instead of frustration, and kindness instead of assumptions, ordinary mornings can become unforgettable miracles. Sometimes the best love story doesn't begin with perfect timing. Sometimes it begins with 4 simple words whispered by someone doing their very best: "Sorry, I'm late." And sometimes, those words become the first chapter of a lifetime filled with hope, healing, and the beautiful reminder that kindness will always matter.